taught to become part of the shrine, part of this, being a high priest, which later in my life I became a high priest. Not in the time of the pharaohs. It was when the Hebrews arrived to Israel, as we know today, and from Hebrews they became Jews. As part of the Jewish nation at the time, I moved with them from Egypt into Israel. I eventually became the high priest, which I served until the end of my life. I lived over 900 years in this reincarnation, which, by the way, was my longest reincarnation. So far, I have 69 reincarnations, but I can only remember for some reason only 23. I was trained by the high priest. I was exposed into the life of the shrine and the life of the palace. By the way, the high priest at the time was you. You were the high priest at the time, and I was under your wing, and you were training me, and through you, I got to very high places within the shrine. Over there, they teach you about everything you can possibly think of. This life, past lives, meditation. The high priest was highly spiritually motivated. The pharaohs at the time, which were known to the common man during that era, they were known as the sons of God. That's the way they called them. The nickname at the time was Factisol. That's the name they used, Factisol, the sons of God. And for the common man during that era, Egyptians or Hebrews, doesn't make a difference. They were God for them. They perceived them as gods. And they came here from different planets during a different era, which I'm not going to get into right now. It's not important. But the pharaohs were running the whole world. They were highly evolved entities as well, that later contaminated themselves by mating with the common woman, or the common man, on the other part. And as I said, eventually when the Hebrews left Egypt, the famous story about Exodus, I became at a certain point, many years after that, the high priest, with my wife at the time. My name was Mono. Her name was Gamma. She was part of the Factisol. The pharaohs, we fell in love, but when the Hebrew left to Israel, we left together, and we actually got married in the desert, and we lived together until the destruction of the temple, the Jewish temple. She served with me as a high priest as well. She had a different title, not a high priest, which was very uncommon because she was a woman, and she was not a Hebrew. She was part of the Factisol. She was not one of the Jewish nation, but she was highly respected.
Can I interject? I don't want to, interrupt you while you're going, but I have a lot of questions along the way. Let's start with, one of the first ones. Number one, you mentioned that I was the high priest back then. Why don't I remember?
Most people don't remember, but most people were here before. Very few people are new souls. You were here many times before. Part of the process in the shrine in Egypt was to teach you how to remember, how to connect to the divine, how to move dimensions. You were my teacher at that time. I am a type of guide right now for you, but I'm not your teacher. But if you would be able to go through this process, you might be able to remember. Everybody has the capacity to remember. It all depends on what you're going through and who is there to show you the light. I was one of the lucky guys. In 2010, I was a very normal guy, a family man, businessman. I had nothing to do with the spirit world, absolutely nothing. And suddenly, somebody shows up on the scene and takes me through this process. And by the way, if you speak to my mentor, who happens to be over 400 years old, when he was 50 years old, somebody approached him. So it's always somebody approaching you and recruiting you into the organization. And at the same time, they put you through a process that gives you those abilities. And those abilities, if you can reach the right dimensions, you can meditate and touch the light. I know it's hard to understand. You can meditate and see the spirit world. You're not allowed to talk to them unless they talk to you. I would never talk to a dead person, but I've been approached by dead people. Again, crazy thing. Scary thing. You doubt yourself all the time. Maybe you're going crazy, and you're making stuff up. So it's a process. Those days, we were able, the Factisol mortals get to the 8th dimension, the 9th dimension. For them, it was part of their life, and the teaching every son or daughter of the pharaoh at the time went through this process as a child. And then they go back to the palace. Then people like me, who were Hebrews, some of them were doing the same process, but never to the level of the pharaohs, of the Fatness Hall. They were a different level, a different breed, different blood. For example, Gamma was my wife at the time. We didn't leave Egypt. This would never happen. There was no way that a Hebrew would marry the daughter of a pharaoh.
I have to stop you for a second because something that you're saying doesn't make sense to me on a personal level. On one hand, you're saying that this race of pharaohs that came from somewhere else are, highly spiritually evolved and basically see all as one. Why would they have a problem if you marry a life that's also part of their oneness, that isn't a part of their race? It sounds racist. How does a spiritually advanced being come in and say, no, you can't marry that Hebrew, let's say?
Who told you that? They saw us as one.
In the document, it says that their awareness, that their consciousness was basically liberated, spiritually speaking. They weren't, limited to the limitations of time and space because they saw everything as one, because they were in universal awareness, because they were one with all. It specifically says there was no us and them, or here and there in their awareness and their consciousness. But at the same time, you're saying that, a pharaoh wouldn't be able to marry a Hebrew. The two don't go together.
First of all, let's go back to the beginning. Where did the Fatness Hall come from? They came from 4 different planets. Planets that were destroyed. Why? I don't know. But I know they came from 4 different planets to 4 different corners of this world. One of the reasons they came, I think because they lost their planet, or something happened there. Number 2, the purpose was to come, again, for the betterment of humankind. Because humankind